Now in War Thunder, the Mig-23M, our first aircraft with all-aspect infrared homing missiles. Let's check it out. As soon as I saw that the MiG-23 was coming to War Thunder, I knew that it was going to be both an amazing and terabad aircraft at the same time. In order to understand the deal with this plane, we have to dig a little bit more than usual into some context about the aircraft and about War Thunder itself in order for this review to make any sense. First, what is the MiG-23? In short, it's a variable geometry interceptor designed in the 1960s to intercept strategic bombers as far from possible as their targets. The airframe, its performance, and its weapons system all reflect this goal. The MiG-23 is very specifically not a dogfighter, at least not the version we have right now in War Thunder. What we have is the Mig-23M. This was a first-generation version, which was the first revision to enter mass production after the prototypes were ironed out. It's armed with two versions of the R-23 missile, at least once you grind to unlock them, which will be a chore in this plane. More on that later. The R-23 itself is an enormous beyond visual range weapon, which comes in semi-active radar and infrared homing versions. In real life, the MiG-23 would carry one of each and ripple them off two at a time, firing the IR missile a second before the radar missile to make it more difficult for the target to evade with countermeasures. In War Thunder, we can't do that, at least not yet. So we have to use these missiles two at a time with the same type, two infrared or two semi-active radar, which limits our ability to use the real-life strategy in the game. So we have to adapt to the gameplay within War Thunder. Now with the higher tiers, War Thunder is a dogfight furball game. Sooner or later, the match ends up in a furball with fighters trying to outmaneuver each other. There are no bomber intercept missions, at least not yet, and the gameplay in air-to-air heavily favors a turn-and-burn style of dogfighting. The MiG-23M isn't built for that, and isn't very good at it. The MiG-23 is fast, but it doesn't turn as well as the other top-end fighters we have access to at the moment. So in order to be effective with it, you need to use an extreme hit-and-run style of gameplay. That isn't always possible because other aircraft, lighter dogfighters, can catch up with you, at least to get within missile range before you outrun them over time. You've got some countermeasures, but not many, so you're going to get shot down. Like, a lot. Know this and be okay with it before you climb into this plane. For weapons, you have a twin-barrel cannon with 200 rounds, which is quite effective but difficult to aim. You get a pretty good selection of air-to-air missiles, but you have to grind through the earlier R3 and R13 stuff before you get to the good ones. Before you unlock the R60, the MiG-23 tends to be a bit of a struggle bus in air combat. So, in all honesty, I'd suggest taking the first bomb loadout and make high-speed passes at the strategic bombing targets just to grind out the points for better missiles. The R-23 medium-range missile is your primary armament once you unlock it. In real life, the R-23 is an enormous weapon with a huge warhead. Remember, it was intended to shoot down bombers at beyond visual range. Its use in real-life combat has been mixed. The radar-guided version was supposedly used somewhat effectively during the Iran-Iraq War, but it's difficult to be sure of the results because both sides in that conflict claim really lopsided kill ratios. The infrared version was one of the first all-aspect infrared missiles in the world, and its performance is kinda iffy if you aren't behind the target. One real-world use was during the war between Angola and South Africa. A MiG-23 from Angola, which was actually from Cuba but fighting on the Angolan side, fired an R-23 and scored a hit against the South African Mirage F-1. The South African pilot survived and described the engagement afterwards, saying that the MiG came at him in a head-on supersonic dash and shot, quote, a huge telephone pole at me at almost point-blank range, unquote, scoring a hit and heavily damaging the Mirage. This was the first known combat use of an infrared missile in an all-aspect engagement. In terms of using these weapons effectively in the game, we're going to talk about the infrared version first. The TLDR is that in a rear aspect engagement, it's only effective out to about 3 or 4 kilometers, and in a front aspect engagement, you only have a very brief launch window, right at about 1.5 kilometers before your target flies past you. I'll show some footage of successful all-aspect hits in a couple of minutes. At longer ranges, out past 5 kilometers or so, you can still get a lock, but unless you're firing at a helicopter or something, your target is going to outrun the missile, and it'll run out of fuel before it reaches the target. It's still longer range than a Sidewinder or an R60, but this isn't going to get you kills off at 10 kilometers or anything. The ranges on the stat card are technically accurate, but only in a textbook perfect engagement setup at exactly the right altitude, and you're never going to get that in real gameplay. Now, let's take a look at a textbook interception with the R23T, the infrared homing version. Here you're going to see I'm coming in, making a high-speed pass into this dogfight, targeting these F5s. I'm going to take a shot at a little over 3 kilometers, and that is going to end up in a hit. And then I'm going to come in on the second F5 at closer range and take another shot, which also scores a hit. What I'm not going to do is try and get into the turning furball with any of that stuff, and I'm just going to fly right through the combat and keep going out the other end. Textbook intercept. Now we're going to demonstrate a failed interception. I had to set this up in a test flight, but I fired here off at about 5.5 kilometers. Now I'm going to target my own missile with my radar. It takes a minute, but there you can see I've locked up my own missile, so you can see where it's doing. You see that it's slowly starting to fall off the target as it runs out of fuel. Now that F-86 is not running away from me at supersonic speed or anything, but it's very easily outrunning the R-23. You see it's already starting to drop off there. It's just, there's just no way for it to catch up. The missile eventually gives up and explodes. Now, the semi-active radar homing version of the R-23 is an entirely different beast. Let's take a look at the best possible case scenario for an intercept. Personally, I find semi-active radar missiles in War Thunder extremely difficult to use, but this is the perfect setup. We've got a slow, not really very aggressively maneuvering target. We've got a good solid radar lock at altitude without a lot of ground clutter, and you're going to see in a second we get a missile lock. There we go, the circle is red, and we take a shot, and a few seconds later we get a pop. There we go. That is about as good as it gets under ideal circumstances. Now, let's take a look at actual gameplay. Now, this is about as close to a textbook intercept as I could get during live gameplay, and I tried quite a bit. I'm going to get a good solid lock, both a radar lock and a missile tone on this Hunter, and I'm going to take a shot at about 4.5 kilometers. I'm maintaining the radar lock, and nothing's going to happen. I'm going to take another shot at about 3.5 kilometers here. You're going to see in a second, I'm going to get another good solid radar lock. There it is. Take a shot. Solid lock. Maintained. Nothing. Maybe he dodged him at the last minute. Maybe it was countermeasures. Maybe they fizzled. No way to really be sure. But at the end of the day, the semi-active radar missiles are extremely difficult to use. And most of the time, you're going to have to resort to, using the R60s. And when you switch to the R60s, it's really easy to get sucked into these furballs, and that is a recipe for disaster on the MiG-23, and I got punished for it later in this clip. So that's a pretty typical experience trying to use the radar-guided missiles. Now let's go back to the R-23T for a minute. I want to show off a couple of all-aspect engagements. First, I'm going to come in head-on at this F5 and take a shot. Good solid lock, but it missed. That was a pretty textbook engagement, but he was able to dodge the missile. I have no idea if he actually saw it coming. And then I'm going to turn around and sort of try for a long-range shot into this furball. I didn't intend on this to be an all-aspect intercept. I was going to try and hope, to get one of these other planes that was flying away from me for a kind of a medium-range IR shot. But the plane I ended up going for was this FGR-2. I started getting shot at, had to maneuver, lined up pretty good, this guy coming right at me. There we go, all-aspect shot and a pop. That's about as good as it gets. Unfortunately, I now have like 4 or 5 guys behind me because I flew into a dogfight and was punished for it, because that's what happens in the MiG-23. Now, you can also carry the R-60, and you can take 4 of them. This is the same missile that you're familiar with from a few other planes, and it can be extremely useful and successful in short-range engagements. Either if you get sucked into the dogfight, or if you've got a pretty good mission lined up and you're sort of playing on the outskirts of the battle like I was doing here, picking off people who stray too far away from their friends. You can still get some reasonable kills once you get the R-60 unlocked. Until you get the R-60 unlocked, struggle bus, but once you do, you can use it to relatively good effect if you're careful about your maneuvering and you set up your intercepts properly. Remember, this still isn't a turn fighter, even though you have a dogfight missile. So, enough about the weapons, let's get back to the plane and how to fly it. I really like the MiG-23. It's fast once you get, above about 700 knots. It's got, the variable geometry profile. You can manually control the wing sweep, just like you can with the Su-17, and it will affect the flight envelope and the turning performance and everything. But in practice, I found that to be more trouble than it was worth. As you just saw there, the wing sweep is not super quick. So you have to really plan in advance, and manually controlling the wing sweep is not, a suitable gameplay mechanic for furball dogfighting. Leave it on automatic, you'll be glad you did. Now, in terms of how to actually fly the plane in a mission, my personal play style with these interceptor-type aircraft is very similar to my play style with the ground pounders. I like to fly around the edge of the map at super low level to try and avoid detection and take pot shots at people who stray too far away from their friends. Remember, the MiG-23 is not a dogfighter. It's a really unique aircraft. Its closest Western counterpart would be like an F-102 or an F-106 maybe. It's an interceptor, so try to intercept things, even though the game modes really don't give you a lot of opportunity for that. You can also use it, as I mentioned, you can use it for ground pounding. I would recommend doing that with the early bomb loadout to unlock, some of the better air-to-air missiles. But at the end of the day, you're an interceptor, not a ground attack aircraft. You do not have the bomb aiming reticle, the flight computer for that. You also do not get any of the larger types of bombs. You can get some unguided rockets, so if you're good at aiming those, they can be useful. Flying this as a support aircraft in ground RB, I found to be extremely difficult. I was able to intercept some helicopters, but in terms of actually hitting ground targets, it's just too damn fast. When I was trying to set up some runs, I either got wasted by AAA because I had to fly in, a fast straight line that is easy for them to intercept you with, or I was just moving too damn fast and I couldn't accurately aim the weapons. So, I have a hard time recommending this in air-to-ground gameplay. Performance-wise, the MiG-23 is relatively decent. It can climb quickly. It can accelerate quickly once you get up to speed. Its takeoff is sluggish, but once you're in the air, it has a responsive throttle and everything. Its landing performance is relatively good. You can unsweep the wings for, to lower your landing speed, and it has drag chute, so that's always decent. However, For maneuvering and turning, it's still a bit of a struggle bus, and in order to turn at all, you're going to have to go full deflection, and you're going to spend a lot of time with your pilot blacked out. The footage that you're seeing here, and actually all of the footage in this, is with the G suit unlocked and equipped, and a max rank pilot, at least as high as you can go without spending GEs on your crew. And you just black out all the time. The interior cockpit on the MiG-23 is amazing. War Thunder has really gotten some excellent internal cockpits over the last couple of years, and I really think the MiG-23 cockpit is one of the best. I found some pictures online of MiG-23 cockpits, and it seems to be pretty accurate. The one real Achilles heel is what you're seeing right here. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the MiG-23 was originally designed as an interceptor, not a dogfighter. So it doesn't have a bubble canopy or anything like that. And if you're in a sharp turn, above like, say, 70 degrees or so, and you're trying to track a target that you're turning in on, it's extremely difficult because you have canopy bracing, directly above you, and you can't see around it. If you're flying in VR mode, which unfortunately I'm not set up to do video capture for, but I did try this in a couple of VR missions. In order to see a target that you're turning in on, you have to sort of like slew your head to the side as you're looking up, and it's extremely uncomfortable on your neck. I do not recommend, flying this in VR mode if you're going to do anything but fly in a straight line. It's very difficult. I didn't have a good time with that. The heads-up display functions relatively well, as you're seeing in the footage here. It's got useful information on it. The artificial horizon is good. You've got good target indicators and all that. Your useful information is right there in front of you. It's got the rearward view mirrors, which are functionally useless, but, they're still there. It was kind of an obligatory thing. And it's even got a functional wing sweep indicator down in the cockpit. All the gauges and everything work. And in general, it's just absolutely beautiful. So if you have a VR headset and you're able to try this out, even just in a test flight, I strongly recommend it. Just to admire the amazing work that they did on this cockpit. Even if it's very uncomfortable, to actually fly this out at a mission using the headset. So, overall, the MiG-23 is a little bit of an odd duck in the current game. The version we have of the Mig-23M is a pure thoroughbred high-speed interceptor. It does not fit into the current meta. Maybe we're going to get, strategic bombers as playable aircraft in the future, B-52s, B-47s, Tu-16s, Tu-95, that kind of stuff, but we don't right now. Maybe there will be missions in the future that pit fighters against bombers or something and escorts, but there's nothing like that in there now. So this ends up being a little bit of a fish out of water. You've got a high-speed interceptor with a weapon system geared towards interception, performance geared towards interception, and you're forced into, turn and bird and dogfight missions. It's very hard to use it effectively. There were later versions of the MiG-23 in real life, where the designers moved some of the weight around and, reduced some of the interior weight and whatnot. And they were able to dramatically improve the maneuverability and produce some versions that were effective dogfighters. And maybe we'll see one of those in the future. But for right now, the MiG-23 we have is not an effective dogfighter. I have a hard time recommending this unless you're just a fan of the aircraft like I am. The MiG-23 has always been one of my favorite planes. I just love the aesthetics of it. But, unless you're a fan of the plane, I have a hard time recommending this for serious gameplay. You're going to die a lot, and you have to be okay with that. You're going to get frustrated, and you have to be okay with that. So what's the overall verdict on the MiG-23? Well, it's complicated. It's fast, It has the highest top-end speed of any aircraft in the game, and once you get up about, above 500 or 600 knots, it accelerates quickly. It has beyond visual range infrared missiles, currently the only aircraft in the game that does, and it has all aspect infrared missiles. It's really, the weapon system is the defining characteristic of the aircraft. However, there are some drawbacks. It's a dedicated interceptor. It is not a dogfighter, and if you get sucked into a furball, you're going to have a hard time. The semi-active radar homing missiles, while good range, are effectively useless in actual practical gameplay unless you're targeting, non-maneuvering AI targets. And it is an extremely painful grind. Once you have the aircraft unlocked, getting points with it with the default loadouts and the earlier missiles on the weapon loadouts is very difficult, and you're going to be forced into like high-speed bombing runs just to try and get some research points, and it's really annoying. So the overall verdict on the MiG-23M, I'm going to have to recommend skipping this one. It's too difficult to use effectively in the current game modes, and I think most players are just going to get frustrated. I like it, but I don't think you will. As always, thanks for watching.